Hey folks, in this episode of the podcast, I get to sit down with Mr. Steve Martin of Ripple Training. This is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the This Week in Photo podcast. I get to sit down with Mr. Steve Martin, one of my heroes from a company called Ripple Training. They're rippletraining.com. Purveyors of fine training on all things Photoshop, DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, all the things. So if you have anything to do with any one of those applications or at all curious about either one of those applications and many others, rippletraining.com is the place. Steve Martin is one of the principals over there, and I call myself a fanboy because feel like I've been watching this guy for years, and he's trained me on how to do this kind of stuff that we're doing right now. And now I get to have him on the show to talk about stuff. I get to pick his brain. Steve Martin, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's good to have you. Like I said, you've taught me more than you can imagine, and I would imagine thousands and thousands of other people can say the same thing. And so, first of all, thank you for putting out such quality training and being such a great educator. It's easy to sort of listen to you and understand your concepts. So, right up the top, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, glad you found our training useful. Just to clarify for people for your intro, our primary focus on our site is Final Cut Pro, Apple Pro apps, and DaVinci Resolve. We don't really do the Adobe apps. So if you're looking for Photoshop, that's not something we really do. So I don't want people to go, where's the Photoshop training? Primarily Final Cut and Resolve.
Okay, good.
And Motion, yeah.
And Motion, yeah, good clarification. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, when I think nonlinear video editors, I think of those three, right? I think of Final Cut Pro, I think of Premiere, and now lately, increasingly people are thinking DaVinci Resolve. So let's start there, Steve. So the conversation is, there's two parts to this conversation, as you and I just sort of discussed in the green room. The first part is this Metaverse side of things where I want to go, and then I'll segue that into the nonlinear editing piece of the conversation. So you and I were in Vegas, at the NAB conference. We're both speaking there, and we're hanging out in the speaker room. And I forget how it came about, but we were having a conversation about 360 video and a little bit about the metaverse and all that stuff that's coming or not coming depending on the day of the week you read about it. Give me you said some pretty poignant things about 360 and your journey with 360. Recap it for me, right? Used to love it, maybe now not so much. Why?
Well, I think the biggest problem with VR right now is resolution and the headsets. I got into it a couple of years back. I bought a 8K 360 camera. And at that time, I was running on a Mac, and the only headset that I could really work with was the Vive headset. And I'd use Final Cut, and I'd send the 360 to the headset. And, that was a pretty cool experience. But, at that time, that Vive headset was, I think it was the whole package was $1,000. And it was mainly used for gaming. And I was hoping to kind of see a lot more adoption of people wanting to use VR in the video space. And I quickly learned that, just by implementation of uploading different VR clips to YouTube and whatnot, that I wasn't getting any traction. And there were two reasons for that. Number one, the resolution is just not there. In order to get a really immersive VR experience, you really have to present, and especially if you're doing stereo VR, you really have to have at least 4K per eye. I mean, that's minimum. I mean, if you want more of a lifelike, you really want to go up to 12K per eye. But nobody's talking about that because they're not producing headsets. All the manufacturers, including the aforementioned Metaverse, aka Facebook, they're making these Oculus glasses or headsets. I believe you can sideload them to about 2K, and they look okay, but it's not. In my opinion, it's not a great experience. And for a lot of people, they still haven't solved the problem with the motion sickness. A lot of people don't, feel comfortable in a completely immersive environment. And then the resolution. I mean, I was looking at what Canon was doing. They were showing. I've really found it funny that Canon was really pushing this VR scenario. It wasn't 360. It was 180. They had this lens that captured a 4K per eye, which resolution was great. But then they take that 180 and they'd sideload it into an Oculus Quest, and it was down res to 2K, and it just didn't look good. And I just think in terms of resolution, it's just not there yet. And a lot of people are adverse to wearing headsets.
Yeah, I wonder if those the medical piece of it, you know, this motion sickness or the enclosed syndrome, those things, right? Maybe not not surmountable, right? Depending on how you can approach it. I don't know the medical reason behind all that, but the resolution piece of the argument, I wonder if, and what do you think? Is it just that we're at the beginning of this? Because I've seen a lot of articles that talk about, hey, you know, Apple's doing this, and we're moving into this 4K or more resolution per eye going forward. And I have one of those Quest 2 headsets. We have two of them here, and you're right. The resolution is low. Me personally, I can only go about 20, 30 minutes in there. But I look at it, and I'm wondering if you agree with this. I look at those as the early adopter iPhone 1, you know, level, where the future portends the iPhone 13 level of capability. Do you agree with that, or are we already kind of at state of the art?
Well, I think we need to kind of we need to look at where the industry is right now. You have VR, which is full immersion. You know, you can create any space. You know, you can create worlds, and you immerse yourself in this space, this VR world. And then you have augmented reality, which is taking, you know, real world, taking pretty much the real world, and then putting 3D objects in that world. Mm-hmm. And then you have what you call mixed reality, which is video and AR kind of combined. And I think all of the development right now is, you know, Facebook aside and what they're doing with the metaverse, I think a lot of the focus is on AR. Because if you think about it, like the problems that you have to solve from an engineering standpoint, AR and VR are very similar problems that have to be solved. The advantage that AR has over VR right now is that, I mean, we have AR capable phones, right? And until they get to the point where the glasses are just pretty much like this, like pretty natural, I just think that VR is going to be pretty niche, because, I mean, like you mentioned, medical applications, applications where you want to put people in an environment that normally would be unsafe or dangerous. You can put them in there for training purposes. I think there's special use cases for VR. I'm not saying that, but AR is where all the development's going, because, like, for example, with your phone and technologies that, especially with the AR kit, I think it's Apple's AR Kit 5. They're using it more practical ways, to where, like, if you go into a store, you'll be able to look at objects, and it'll actually give you navigation inside a store. If you're in a house that you're not familiar with, or an office, you'll be able to use the AR. It'll give you like 3D arrows about where you're supposed to go. And I think that's where a lot of the focus is right now. And eventually that will be with headsets with mixed AR and VR. But right now I think we're still a way off in terms of people adopting, or at least wanting to put on the headsets for that experience. We're using our phones pretty much for that right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Looking at that world, that VR versus AR world, I see them as the utopian vision of the full VR experience is Ready Player One, right? Or Snow Crash, right? Where you're getting in there, and it's just your real world life is crap, and you go into this VR world and you're a king, and it's better, and you can't tell the difference between the real and the artificial, all that stuff, right? So that I think that's the utopian vision, but I think you're right. The more realistic step before that, even if we do get to that, is augmented. And wow, and we've been doing that forever, right? We've been doing that since, I think Yelp was doing that. Remember Yelp I don't know if the feature's still in Yelp, but you could aim your phone at a business and it would pop up with a little overlay of the business's rating and all that stuff. But yeah, and we used to joke about, wouldn't it be cool if you could go into some, the 20 somethings go into some club, and when they look around the room, they see credit scores hovering above people's heads. So it's just a ton of stuff like that. Even in cars, if you had your AR glasses on, getting more information about what's happening with the vehicle and all that stuff. I wonder though, we talk about Apple coming out with these AR glasses. They're a multi-trillion-dollar companies, right? So if anybody can do it, and with the design aesthetic and technical acumen that Apple has, anybody can. If anybody can do it, Apple probably will do it. But the other side of that coin is Google tried it with Google Glass, or did they? Right? Yeah, I'm sure you had a pair of those Google glasses back in the day, or at least tried them, right? What's the delta? And I know what the delta is, but I want to hear what you have to say about it in terms of people that are looking at the failure, quote, that was Google Glass, and now Apple Glass might be coming. Is it the same thing? Are they going to suffer the same fate? What do you think?
No, I think they're different, because you're taking kind of a 2D reality and just superimposing graphics over the screen. And that was one thing. And people didn't want to necessarily be sitting in a coffee shop with these Google glasses with a camera and the tracking. And I think that was, an interesting concept. But if you really want to look at where things are going, then you need to really look at what Microsoft is doing with their HoloLens, where you have a headset. And right now it's very much VR. It's a very expensive $3,000 headset. But what's interesting is you walk into a room and the app scans the entire room and it makes a mesh of everything. So you're able to interact with anything in the room, get information about objects in the room. And that's where I think's going to the point, eventually, to where these headsets right now are very expensive and big, need to get to the point where they're small and they're lightweight and they're unobtrusive, but do the same thing that the HoloLens does right now for $3,500. And that's, Microsoft and Meta, they're trying to solve the same problem, which is, in this post-pandemic world, how do we get away from this 2D world, this 2D conferencing, and move it into more of a 3D, to where we're giving the participants a context, which they didn't have before. And that's what's missing right now, is context. And that's what they're trying to solve with the metaverse. And what Microsoft is trying to solve is the context of putting you in a space where you're interacting with real world objects, and you're interacting with people that may be avatars or even real people. And that's what they're trying to solve, is trying to give you a more of a 3D contextual experience.
Yeah. And that it sounds great on the surface, right? But it is great. I think, where things could go, there's a lot of what ifs in there too, that I think a lot of people, myself included, are cautiously optimistic about. And that's this Web 3.0 idea, of which the metaverse is part of, is allegedly going to be secured by an underlying layer of blockchain technology, which is what secures crypto and NFTs and all those good things. And I wonder if, because it's that secure, quote, that secure, will there be some things that happen in the meta, quote, the metaverse, right, that can't happen in the real world, therefore driving people into the metaverse, like that killer app, right? Like the killer app for Web 1.0, I guess, was email, arguably email. Is there going to be something like that, do you think? Putting on your futurist hat, something like that for the metaverse that's going to just drive mass adoption in there, and no holds barred, which will kind of ignite the industry. I don't know. What do you think? Is there something like that should happen in there?
Well, right now the larger scale reaction to the metaverse in terms of immersive and AR, VR environment, or what we call even mixed reality, XR, is been largely negative. There are people that look at that and say this is the future, but right now they that killer app that you talked about, it has to be an app or an experience that they're going to get in AR, VR that they're not going to get just in maybe driving across town and sitting in a room with somebody. So I don't know what that is, actually. I know I don't know what it is right now. I just know that I'm reticent to put on a headset for an hour, whatever, and be in a meeting in the metaverse, especially with other avatars. I'm just not there yet. I don't find that to be an experience that, I would enjoy. I actually like being in a physical room with physical people. I mean, being a trainer, I suppose I can see a world where I can, as the technology evolves, where I'm in a physical space and people are interacting with me, and I can bring up a product or an object. I could bring up like this VR camera I just happen to have here, and people can they can look at it, they can scan it, they can turn it around in 3D and then get information on it. That's actually very interesting from a training instruction standpoint, putting people in an environment where they can interact with the objects around them and the people around them. Yeah. And not just avatars, I think the technology, honestly, I think we're a good 5 to 10, excuse me, sorry. I think we're a good 5 to 10 years away from the experience that they're marketing to us right now, honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's kind of like when I think of this space, I think of like Uber and Lyft, right? That kind of revolutionized and disrupted the cab and ride sharing world, right? And we didn't know that was even a possibility. Remember back when you were standing in line for your iPhone 1, did you think at some point there'd be a ride sharing type experience that you could just, pump in or not even tell it your address, just say, hey, come get me and I want to go there, and have a car show up? We had no idea that those apps were coming. I wonder if there's something like that, back on that killer app thing, I wonder if there's something like that or a series of things like that will make it less painful, or that will solve some problem that we didn't really realize needed to be solved, that is solved by, AR, VR, or XR, right? And I don't know.
That's a really good point. Is it has to solve a problem, and one of the interesting things about AR, I like the idea of being a trainer, technical manuals. Like I was just watching a video not too long ago where, and you walk up to a coffee machine, right, in your office, and you're like, it looks simple enough, but the AR technology could look at it and do a scan of it, bring it up, and then pull in all the buttons and bring up information about. You can literally get a real-time AR feedback on how to operate the machine, and I could see that for all kinds of things. Rental of maybe renting a piece of gear for excavation, or renting a particular camera or something you're unfamiliar with, and in AR space, and it gives you a real-time manual, of how to use this thing. And now I have a reason to put on the glasses. It's like, oh, okay, now I understand how that works. And because again, the phone limits you because you're still dealing with a 2D space. The AR puts it in a 3D space, and now you're looking at it in context, and it's giving you information about how to use it. I think that's fascinating. That could be a killer app for me if the glasses were lightweight and unobtrusive, and I needed information about something. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, like putting together some IKEA furniture or something. You're like, honey, where are the glasses? And you put the glasses on, and it just tells you, okay, now turn this piece. Now go find this little screw and put it in there. And yeah. Or
even like shopping. You don't even have to go into a physical space. You could, walk through virtually, and you can see all the products. You can literally, quote unquote, pick them up, turn them around with the technology is moving it. I don't want to use lasers. I want to use my hand. Just like Steve Jobs said, this is the best stylus. I want to be able to physically, it knows where my hand is in relationship to that object. I pick up the object, I turn it around, I can look at it. I could even try it on. I mean, virtually, like have a virtual mirror, or give the product some sort of a spin virtually before I commit to it. I think that's really promising.
Yeah. There's so much there. we could talk about this, just that piece for hours. I want to segue the conversation into content creation for that world, right? Yeah. So you held up that camera 360 or whatever that thing is. So you held up that camera. That's one way to get, I love those. So that's one way to get 360, or that's one way to generate content. This world that's coming, let's say this metaverse world is coming, let's say 5 years down the line, content creators today are, not so much, maybe not even just the metaverse, maybe just shooting 360 video, and they just want to edit 360 video. Like Insta360, for example, has this idea. I don't know if other manufacturers do that, but I know you know this. They have this idea of editing in post, or reframing your shot in post, because the camera is essentially capturing everything. So later you can go in and aim it where you want and set keyframes and do all the things like a director would do on the scene. But then what after that? Like, you do that. What are my options after I shoot some content like that to bring it into a 360 environment, to edit it? And there's a two-part question. And how does that relate to the metaverse and this XR stuff? Do I need that skill set right now? Should I be preparing and learning how to edit and cut 360 video to be relevant in 5 years? What do you think?
Well, the first part of your question is, how is 360 technology being utilized today by content creators? Yeah. And as I mentioned at the start of our conversation, and I learned this the hard way after spending a lot of money on gear and infrastructure, that people aren't interested in putting on headsets and watching 360 videos on YouTube. Yeah. What they're interested in, and most content creators will use these to capture, like you mentioned, the entire environment. And I don't have to worry if my camera's pointed in the right direction, because I know it's capturing everything. Then I would take this image, let's say it's 5.2K, and most of the consumer cameras are shooting up a little over 5K now. And you take this 5K image and put it into a HD timeline, and then you would use these tools, whether it's Premiere or Final Cut. I don't believe Resolve has a direct VR tool I think you have to go into Fusion to use their VR tools. It's not in the edit page. Anyway, now once you put it in there, then you have full access to every the entire sphere. Now, a background, when I was doing this, we had to use third-party software to take that spherical data and stitch it together, because, you have two cameras, you have to stitch both sides of this image. And prior to the recent cameras, you had to do that using software on your computer. Now, with our phones being so powerful, and even some of these cameras that being stitched on the phone or being stitched in the camera themselves. So by the time you get the file, it's already in what's called the equirectangular format. So you just import it into your editing software, drop it into a timeline, and then use the VR tools to manipulate it. And so you could look at anything you want in the sphere, and you then keyframe that perspective. You're essentially directing your video after you've shot it, as opposed to prior to shooting it.
Which is great. I mean, for me, that's freaking science fiction, man. That you can do that and point your camera after. I mean, I understand the science or the technology and how it works. You're punching into a sphere inside of that equirectangular format, and it's doing all the math to present to our dumb 2D human eyes what we want to see. I get that, but it just seems really, really interesting. And I've tried that. I have a couple of 360 cameras. One of them is the Insta360 1X or 2X, whatever, one of them. And it has that, they have that feature of being able to go into post and re-aim the camera. The problem that I've seen so far, at least with what I've been playing around with, is like you said in the beginning, it's resolution, right? It still feels very proof of concept. And hey, I can show this to my family, but I'm definitely like, I wouldn't show anything to you, right? But I'll show it to my family all day long, or people on social, or things that don't really matter. But we need ultra resolution, or what resolution do we need in order for it to be crisp enough so that when you punch into it, you're getting 4K or at least 1080? I don't know. What do you think? Or is there anything out there like that right now?
I think if you're shooting with your Insta360 One X2, which is a very good camera, and even the new GoPro, I don't know what it's called. Mine was a Fusion; it was an earlier generation, but whatever the GoPro version is right now, those shoot in 5K, a little above 5K, and you put that in a 1080 timeline, and it looks really good. I found that I've been able to cut it with other 1080 stuff, and it doesn't look soft. It looks decent. But if you're putting it in a 4K timeline, then it is going to look soft because you don't have as many pixels in that equirectangular image to move around the sphere. Mm-hmm. So if you want a 4K version of that equirectangular image, you're going to need to shoot in 8K or 12K, and that's what I feel the next generation of action cameras are going to have. They're going to move them into 8K, which is then you can put a 4K timeline and cut it with 4K imagery. But right now, the 5.2K of these cameras is plenty sufficient for delivering in HD because it's more than 4 times the resolution.
Oh, interesting.
That frame.
And what I was solving for, I was having one of those what if moments when I was trying to convince myself that I needed the Insta360 One X2, as we do. And the what if moment was, wouldn't it be cool if I could take here it is right here. If I could take this camera and put it on a little stand, in that room where you are right now. If I could just put it in the middle, of to have you turn your chair around and interview you with one camera sitting between us or even adjacent to us, and then later generate clips that I could then bring into a multicam workflow. So aim the camera at you and just, give me the full conversation of just Steve. Aim it at me, give me the full conversation of just Frederick, and maybe a 2-shot, and then cut between them in the nonlinear editor, right? So that's what I was thinking would be possible. Of course, mic us both up with Rode Go 2s or something. Is that a viable workflow? And why wouldn't I want to do that?
You could do that right now. Because there's a lens on each side of this camera, right? So I just put this between you and I, right? Yeah. So you're on one side and I'm on the other, and we're having a conversation. And then you can if you want, then one side of the sphere is in one angle and the other side of the sphere is in the other angle, and you just cut between them. Yeah. So that can be done right now. In fact, you don't even need a 360 camera to do that. There's a company called Filmic Pro makes an app called Double Take. I don't know if you've seen it. Double Take, it allow you to. I could put this phone here. You could be the front-facing camera, and I can be in the rear-facing camera, and it records 2 streams of HD video, and I can do the same thing. So, but yes, you could do that right now with that camera, just wherever you place it, because again, it's shooting, everything, and you just create 2 different streams. You and me, and you just cut back and forth.
Yeah. Would you do that if you were to do that, like in an interview type situation? Would you do the post inside of, say, the Insta360 app or the manufacturer's app, or would you do like I'm talking about and bring those into Final Cut or whatever application and cut between them using multicam?
Yeah, I just bring it in. I wouldn't do it in their app. Their app is primarily designed to go straight from the camera, processed, like you said, edit it using this little, what do they call them, waypoints or control points, whatever they're like keyframes, and then go straight to social media. Their entire point of that camera is they're marketing those cameras to people who want to instantly upload their video to Instagram or TikTok once they're done, right from their phones. Right from their phones. So if you want to do something more sophisticated like a multicam, you would need to bring it into Final Cut or Premiere. Yeah,
interesting. All right, so I want to wrap this up with an unanswerable question, Steve.
Unanswerable.
Unanswerable. So I'm bracing you for the unanswerability of this next question. Which this is like the which camera should I buy, Steve? This is the which nonlinear video editing software should people be paying the most attention to, all things being equal, and if we take out the first part, we redact the first part of this conversation about editing 360 video. If you just want to get into video right now, you feel like you want to start a YouTube channel or whatever, there's those choices. Yeah, I know you can't speak to Premiere. You guys don't really train on that, but you train on Final Cut Pro. I've seen you. You're a wizard, and you know where all the skeletons are buried in that app. DaVinci Resolve just revved and put some cloud-based collaboration type tools in there and a bunch of other magical things in there. What do they do? We know the pricing differences are obviously an issue or a point that you'd want to consider, but all things being equal, where would you advise a brand new person to jump into, right? And let's assume they have a Mac, right? So they have the option of using Final Cut.
Well, I'm full disclosure, I'm going to be biased towards Final Cut. I've been using it since the beginning. When Apple announced Final Cut 10, there was no small uproar because they completely changed the UI. And a lot of people were comfortable using the legacy version of Final Cut. It was easy to jump over to Premiere because it was pretty much the same paradigm. That being said, people don't know that the largest market share in terms of nonlinear editing system is Apple's iMovie because it comes installed on every Mac. So everybody has iMovie. Yeah. So what Apple did that was really smart is they made Final Cut very, very much like iMovie in terms of UI. So moving your project from iMovie to Final Cut was really just kind of a, one step up. And then Apple made this very pro application that looks like iMovie on the surface, but deceptively it's not. It's got, like you said, it's got so much power into it. I think to answer your question directly, I think people that are starting out that are completely unfamiliar with video editing, I think they would have much more success jumping into Final Cut because it's so iMovie-like. It's comfortable. It's got a simple interface. A lot of the it's not a noisy application. And again, this is not to diss those other applications like Premiere Resolve, but it's just not noisy. You got a window and a timeline and your clips, and you just drag stuff in and you start trimming. It's really I could teach someone Final Cut in 30 minutes, where it would take me much longer to explain how to use Premiere or Resolve just because of its UI foundations are based on a paradigm that's long since gone, which is this source tape metaphor. That's a bygone era, and that UI is still locked to that era. Where Final Cut, where Apple did, is a completely different way of approaching media. And in terms of getting up to speed quickly, I think Final Cut for new users is the way to go, just because of the simplicity of its UI.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I've edited the last 100+ episodes of This Week in Photo on Final Cut. And it's fluid. I'm on a Mac, so it's very hard to move to other things once you're in Final Cut for the reasons that you mentioned. Here's the other side of that coin, though, Steve. What about mobile? Right? These mobile devices. I know you have an iPhone 13. I've got one. These things are magical, both in terms of their photography and video features, but also in terms of the software that's on them. Like LumaFusion is an app that I'm sure you're familiar with that is like it feels like a mobile, to me as an outsider, it feels like a mobile version of Final Cut Pro that's living on your device with a bunch of power in there. And I interviewed the founders over there, or one of the founders, and she said one of the upcoming features in LumaFusion is, I think, scopes they're adding in there, and multicam is a big tentpole feature that's going to be in the next release. How do you feel about that world as an educator that understands the ins and outs of Final Cut and the pro workflow? Is mobile viable, and should be considered as an alternative?
Just to say about LumaFusion, it's probably the best editor out there for iOS devices. It's fantastic. It really is. Yeah. Now, that said, I wouldn't edit on it because I'm just so much faster on my laptop. The idea of just, I know you can use a pencil and everything, and I've really wanted to use this thing to cut something for YouTube, whatever. It literally takes me twice as long, just because it's very clicky, very tappy. Where knowing the shortcuts of Final Cut, I'm just fast with a keyboard. I I don't have to fumble around with the UI. I'm not saying that it's not useful, but just for me, I just find it just cumbersome to use, if that's the right word. And I don't like editing on a phone. I mean, that's the screen really small, maybe an iPad, but even then it's just not a fast experience for me.
You know, I had a conversation about that very thing during one of my sessions. I brought Jeff. I think you know Jeff Greenberg, right? So I brought Jeff on the stage, and we were talking about this kind of a very similar topic: pro workflows, quote pro workflows versus mobile workflows, and where is the line in there? You know, is there a blurred line in there? And the framing of that question for you is, and I brought this up with Jeff. Are you personally, are you saddled with the curse of knowledge, right? And I threw this at Jeff too. You're an educator. You know, you can get, like you said, you can get in Final Cut and get something done in 3 minutes, right? Because you've been using it for so long and it's second nature. You know, you could just think of how to edit something and it's done, right? Whereas in that app, not saying you couldn't get that familiar with it, but you didn't grow up with say LumaFusion and mobile. Would that same argument hold water for somebody that did, that just, you know, hey, I never had a proper computer. I did all my stuff on the phone and then I moved to the iPad and I'm fast on that now. I can get a lot of stuff done. Mm-hmm. And those other apps, you know, I'm, you know, making up some fictitious person, but those other apps seem overly complicated and heavy and too many features. I could get so much done streamlined on this app. What about that? I mean, is that viable? Or in the other side of that conversation is mobile just a stepping stone into more capable apps like Final Cut?
Well, let's say if I was traveling somewhere and all I had was an iPad and I needed to cut a video, I'd have no qualms about using LumaFusion or even iMovie to put something together. Yeah. But the problem for me is I do a lot of multi-track stuff and I do green screen. I do multicam. I need the horsepower of a bigger machine. If I was doing just straight, string outs of a talking head at the beginning of video and a couple of B-roll, I'd say there's nothing wrong with that. But if you looked at my timelines with a lot of connected audio clips and sound effects and music and fading in, and I could do all of that. It just, like I said, it would take me too long. And it's really a matter of speed. And again, nothing wrong with the app, but I don't see myself using it because you're right. Maybe I do have all this head knowledge of how to use Final Cut, but I feel like if you're going to be cutting stuff and time is money, then you're not going to, the laptop or even a desktop is just going to be so much faster at the end of the day. And one other thing about LumaFusion, you still have a UI you have to contend with. There are tracks, there's, edit modes, there's, like you said, scopes. And you still have to, they're trying to move it into this pro sphere. You still have to learn, how the UI works. It's not like iMovie. If I was going to edit with any mobile device at all, I'll rough it out in iMovie right on my phone, and then I'll send it over to Final Cut and then finish it in Final Cut. Because the iMovie interface is simple. It's a screen and a timeline. And I just drop clips in, trim, drop clips in, trim, done, send it to Final Cut. I don't necessarily want this full nonlinear UI on a iOS device. I just, at the risk of beating a dead horse, I just don't find it something I would use. That's
interesting because when you think of it through that lens, right, through the phone or mobile is part of an overall ecosystem versus the end all be all. I'm going to start and finish on that device. If you think of it from an ingestion, and this is going to be uncomfortable for a little bit, and then I'm going to stretch my legs out in the real nonlinear video editor, quote real, right? But a different operating system over here, that makes a lot of sense because now you kind of have the best of both worlds. And you don't have to worry about, I needed to get this rough cut done. I couldn't do it because my real computer was back in the room. I can get this done real quick before dinner. Boom, you're done. Yeah, that's interesting. The metaphor that came to mind while you were saying that was, I don't know if you've ever done this, but back in the days when we were trying to looking for our first jobs, I remember changing clothes for a job interview in the car, right? So you're like, I can do it. You don't want to do it.
You do it, but do you want to do it?
Right.
That's the question. You can do it, but do you want to do it?
It's uncomfortable. You can get it done for the most part, but you really rather be in your bedroom changing clothes. All right.
That's good. I like that.
It's true. So I'll end with this, Steve. I want to. The processors out there are just, again, magical. I feel like we're living in this Arthur C. Clarke, technology versus magic kind of era with these M1, processors, and allegedly there are numbers after M1. So whatever comes next and what's here now have in my head, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. These M1 processors have shifted a lot of things, right? Have changed the capability. Even my office. I'm about to redo my office. Every couple of years, I redo this little room, and last time I got the Mac Mini and plugged it into this LG display, and that was the way forward. The next way forward is a MacBook Pro with an M1, get rid of this desktop setup, plug in a display and a keyboard and the mouse, and have ultimate portability because the processor power is there. Is it there? I mean, is it enough? Is the processor power in these modern MacBooks enough to replace a desktop system and change the whole metaphor of a small office, home office like this one?
Absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of my stuff on my M1 MacBook Pro, and plug it into any, like you said, any display, and you're not going to miss the desktop. It really depends on what you need to do. Like I do a lot of editing on the road, so I love to take that with me. And I have this super powerful machine. It's actually more powerful. I have an iMac Pro that I'm conferencing you on right now, and I use it all the time, but it's not nearly as fast as my MacBook Pro. And I think having a MacBook Pro with an M1 chip or M2 or M3, whatever's next, is you're going to have all the power that you need. I mean, I don't know how many people are going to need to edit, 6 streams of, 8K multicam. There's very few people that need to do that, right?
Yeah.
So most people are going to edit 1 or 2 streams of video, with some effects and titles. Plenty fast enough. Even the base model M1 is still faster than, even these these top end Intel Macs. So yeah.
I love it. Yeah. See, confirmation, my plan, I tried this. I think I mentioned to you before, I worked at Apple back in the day, and my desk was that. I had a PowerBook. Remember the PowerBook? So I had, I think it was a PowerBook. It might have been MacBook at the time, but I had it was the titanium. Remember the titanium?
It's
MacBook?
funny. I've always thought that Apple should have gone with the PowerBook instead of MacBook. I like PowerBook it just sounds
powerful.
Better. M1 PowerBook.
Yeah.
They should have kept that.
Yeah. And the mode I had there was exactly what I'm talking about now, where I didn't have a desktop machine. Obviously, we had our choice of what machine do you want in your office, right? So I got rid of all the office stuff, and all I had was that portable. And I kept my office almost like an IKEA showroom in there. It was very few things in there except the display, the keyboard, and the mouse, and files and stuff like that. And I had a very similar setup at home, and I would just ferry that computer back and forth and plug in, and I had my whole workstation there. But the problem was power, right? It was, you couldn't do anything like what we're doing here even on that, or definitely 4K wasn't around back then, but 4K would have been impossible. 1080 would have been challenging. And now we're well beyond that, even with the most pedestrian of the M1 configurations, can do everything we probably need to do. What are you missing? We'll end on this, Steve. What are you missing in the world, in terms of the technology that needs to evolve, 360, AR, VR, XR, hardware that needs to evolve, M1 needs to get faster, M2, M3, and then thirdly, the software like the Final Cut Pro, what's missing in that app? What do you need? Like, if you could wave your wand right now and you'd have the perfect stuff, what would that look like?
What's funny, all the computer I'm working on, I'm completely satisfied with. I typically will go 4 years on a computer, or 5 years almost now, before I will replace it. I get at least 4 years out of every Mac I buy. So I'm really happy on the hardware front. On the software front, I want to see more machine learning built into Final Cut. I think machine learning it solves a lot of problems, and it takes well, for example, the new voice isolation feature they've added in Final Cut it's fantastic. It really works amazing. Machine learning I'd like to see machine learning brought into like everyday editorial tasks. So, for example, in Final Cut, let's say I have hundreds of clips, and I want to isolate all of the clips of just beaches or just palm trees. If there's AI for that, I don't have to do any searching. The AI would just sort it, say, show me all the palm tree shots, show me all the beach shots. And now it's really practical. It's saving me time because it's doing something that I do every day. Or for example, like right now, like if my face was underexposed, I could throw a mask on it. And right now I would track that mask, so I could just lighten the face without affecting the background. Well, what if there was AI that saved you the steps of having to actually make the mask, put it on the face, and then click track? What if it just knew that's a face? I'm going to track it for you. Do you want to brighten it? And it just does it. See, that's where I'd like to see more AI technology brought into Final. We're seeing a lot of that on our phones and some of the apps on our Mac. Why aren't we seeing more of that in Final Cut? There's so much more they can bring into Final Cut that they're not. And I just want to see more machine learning.
Yeah, or more technology that takes. That's the whole purpose of AI, taking away the drudgery and repetitive things, so that we can get to the path of resistance to getting to the thing that we have in our head is easier, right? Whether it be selecting or whatever, right? Let the machine handle that now that it has the power, so that I can get to the business of storytelling or doing the thing that I want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like tasks like, cutting. Even now we're seeing AI and all these apps like in Photoshop, or even was it Pixelmator? You just click a button and it just does a mask perfectly around my head and it separates me from the background. A few years ago that would have been a pretty click and a laborious process to separate me. And now it's a click; it just knows the foreground, the background, separates it, and it's just great. It saves a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, now photographers and people that want to do those kind of selections don't need to be, they don't need to self-flagellate themselves learning the Bezier tool and drawing pad.
Oh my gosh.
Steve, before we end here, I want to, hopefully you can give us some insight into Ripple training and what that site is all about. That's what you do from day to day, and helping people become better storytellers and image makers and content creators. Well, what was the impetus of this site, and what is it all about?
Well, I started training Final Cut back in 1999 when it came out, and I was traveling all over the country, and I was doing classes with like hundreds of people. 200 people, standing room only, because at the time, the nearest, the next editing system that you would work on would be an Avid or a Media 100 from 30,000 to 100,000. So Apple brought the cookies down the bottom shelf for the average person to be able to learn video editing. And so I was doing a lot of training, and I had a young family, had little kids, and I got tired of training. So I really started building the site way back in 2001, 2002, so I can deliver training without having to travel anywhere. So that's really the genesis of the site. So I started doing Final Cut, and eventually I started doing Resolve, and I have my partner, Mark Spencer, who does motion. And we built a custom player to deliver the video with chapter markers and comments. And we made it fairly sophisticated so people can, learn virtually from pretty much anywhere. And that's why we did it. That I started because I just want to be with my family more, and then it just kind of grown. So what you're scrolling through is all of our Final Cut training that we just came out with a brand new multicam tutorial. You could see it there. I just released. We just released that last week. We provide all the media, so it's not like you're just watching me. You can actually follow along in your app step by step with the media that we provide. And Mark's coming out next week. This is the first I mentioned Mark's. We're actually doing a Pixelmator to motion tutorial. Remember, you were in my class at NAB, and I was talking about Pixelmator That's a great companion for motion. So Mark's doing a full tutorial on using Pixelmator and motion together as a great motion graphics application. So hopefully we'll have that out next week.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, that was a great session. Thanks for doing that. I think like most of the people in the audience there probably downloaded, if they hadn't already, downloaded Pixelmator to play around with it after
That's
that.
amazing. It's really amazing. It's fantastic. I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to up my subscription to Photoshop. That's how much I like it. And,
interesting.
Yeah, I've been using that for years, and it's like, this has 90% of what I need. So I'm seriously considering ditching Photoshop this year.
Yeah, you and a lot of people, I've heard that, whether it be the Pixelmator argument or the Affinity photo, one time sub $100 fee versus a subscription. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to have another conversation about that. The whole can you get there creatively without the specter of the creative cloud above your head, right?
Right.
Yeah, interesting. So what's next for Steve? What's on your radar? I know you were just out scuba diving, right? And what's next in the adventures of Steve Martin?
Well, it's funny. I do a lot of work for Blackmagic, so I'm going to be at the NAMM show next weekend, which is the big music convention for musicians and instrument manufacturers. So Blackmagic's having me doing some demos of Fairlight, which is their audio. It's their version of the Pro Tools and I guess Logic. So they have a built-in audio editor inside Resolve. So I'll be doing some demos of that at the NAMM show in Anaheim next weekend. And so if you're in California going to the NAMM show, that's where I'll be.
Awesome. I wish I could go to that because I actually am interested in Fairlight. I've played around in it and I have no idea if I should be using it or not. So I guess your session will answer that question. Is that being recorded or is it just for attendees?
The idea is, I think what we're going to do is we're going to shoot a band with multiple cameras, run it through an ATEM switcher, capture the streams, bring it into Resolve, and then use Fairlight, to sweeten the audio and then put it back together for distribution to the internet. So I think Blackmagic, what they're doing, I mean, those little ATEM switchers have been huge, especially in the last 2 years with COVID. It's just a great solution for, multi-camera input. And, with Resolve, you end up with a great post-production solution for these live recorded events.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have 2 of those ATEMs. So yeah, I get it. I know. NAB, I was looking at the Blackmagic booth. You saw that booth, right? Their booth, it was like a whole world. I was like, my ATEM fueled that booth is what I was thinking.
I'm sure they've sold like thousands of them. I mean, it was really smart coming out with that when they did. They just beat everybody, and the price point, it was so smart to make that thing.
Yeah, such a no-brainer. All right, Steve Martin, rippletraining.com. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you. I feel like I could talk to you for like 3 or 4 hours and pick your brain, but I appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
You bet. Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to maybe doing another one of these.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a ton to talk about. We will absolutely do another one as soon as your schedule allows. I appreciate you. All right, man. All right. You enjoy the weekend as we record this. It is just before Memorial Day weekend here in the United States. So you enjoy your time. Hopefully you're going to go on barbecue and, eat a hot dog or 2.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.
This is TWiP.